I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with Jim Strain, who is the writer and co-executive producer of the Waltons Homecoming. And Jim, I just want to kind of start, at the beginning. What was your first kind of exposure to the Waltons?
Oh, I was a big fan when I was a kid watching the Waltons, and the Homecoming obviously is where it all began. And I really remembered that movie starkly in my own mind. It had a big effect on me, and has become an institution over time. It's so I go way back with them.
Well, what was it about that film? I find that there's many people who are not even, they're familiar with the TV series, but may not be familiar with the original television film that starred Patricia Neal. So what was it about that film that grabbed you so much?
I think it was the tone of it and the simplicity of it, and there was a feeling about it, the way they depicted rural life, that was both empowering and instructive, and the characters were wonderful and relatable. So, and it had a lot of heart, and those are the things that struck me, and the things that we've tried to preserve as we move forward and try and bring it to a new generation of viewers.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the interesting things is for this kind of reimagining, this update. What was the decision making in using the actual Homecoming as the foundation, rather than maybe just writing in something completely new?
Well, I think that goes back to Sam Haskell, and this has been something that he has been trying to set up for many years. He's worked very hard on this. It happened to come around the 50th anniversary of the movie, and he's our executive producer. He also serves as a showrunner. He has a very clear vision of what he wants to accomplish, and is a great collaborator. So I think it began with that. That seemed to be the logical place to start, and I was happy to be on board early on in the game. But it's a challenge. It's a daunting kind of thing to try to carry on the Earl Hammond Jr. legacy in the Waltons family. So I was both delighted and a little uneasy about it as well.
So how did you deal with that kind of that unease?
I think the thing with the remake is that there are certain beats, there are certain things that people want to see again, but it also, I felt like, needed a fresh perspective on some things. And so it's trying to balance some new material, some areas where you change things without losing the heart and what really made it important. And for me, one of the keys, there were really two keys. The first was I decided to go back to the novella that Earl Hammond Jr. wrote and use that primarily as my source material. Although I did see the film again, I thought I could get more information about character from the novella, which was very helpful, and picked up some stuff. For example, the white mystical deer, which was used completely different in the novella, but was useful to me. The other thing that I think made a big difference is that initially it was Sam Haskell's idea that the father be on board the bus accident. In both the book and the previous show, that's kind of a red herring. It never really comes into play dramatically. And that struck me as a great, not only dramatic device, but kind of gave me permission to take some literary new directions, within with the source material. So that was helpful too.
Well, and you bring up Earl Hammond Jr., who his voice now is iconic and associated with the Waltons, not just from a writing sense, but also like his actual voice. So in writing some of the newer scenes, was his voice like kind of constantly in your head, or was that something you tried to like put aside, or how did you approach that?
No, it was in my head. And of course, Richard Thomas became the narrator. And he told me once that he had always hoped to be the narrator of the original one. And through various circumstances, they discovered that Earl Hammond Jr. voice was ideal for it. So that still rings in the back of my mind. And when I wrote the narration, I heard him as well. He's
Well,
everywhere.
and then,
I've had tremendous respect for his work and what he's brought to this. So.
and the narration, there's a lot more narration in this film than there even maybe was in the original. In the original series, you oftentimes had the narration at the beginning and at the end, but it's kind of a through line there. What was the rationale for wanting that narration to carry through?
Well, part of it has to do with economy and moving the story along. And particularly since we were dealing with the father's story, which was not covered at all, it seemed to be a good device to keep things rolling and as well as give us some perspective and reinforce some of the thematic elements that we were weaving through the entire project. So I think it became very valuable in that regard.
How much in terms of your contribution, how much room for kind of like creativity and experimentation did you have? Was there something you specifically wanted to bring to this?
Well, I wanted to get a clearer idea of the characters and what made them tick, and bring them up to date a little bit. I mean, for example, Mary Ellen was always the independent person, but she's a little more sensitive to the gender issues in this. And Olivia's a little more tolerant. John from the book is more of a rascal. He's got his side that, some bad habits and whatnot. And kind of wanted to suggest those. And the same is true with the kids. I really wanted to define their characters in a way that they kind of had arcs, because dreams are a very important part of this. It's kind of subtext, but all the players had dreams, aside from John Boy, who wanted to be a writer, that they wanted to fulfill at by the end of the show. So that was in the back of my mind. And then there were 3 characters that we added and that are seeds for potential stories down the line as well. And they were fun to play with. They were searching for for example, the pack horse librarian, which was like their version of the bookmobile. Maggie Sykes was a new character, but it gives John Boy a love interest, as well as somebody outside the family that supports his writing ambitions. So some of those evolved naturally as the script unfolded.
Were there certain scenes, both in the original book and in the original movie, that you were like, I want to do as little to these scenes as possible?
Well, that goes to what the expectations are. I mean, one of the strongest scenes that they had that I recall was the Elizabeth's doll, from the missionary lady. And that was written as a more extended scene, but had to be cut down, but we still had it. The scenes at Ike's store were kind of an expectation. And we wanted to spend some time with them, as well as with the Baldwin sisters, who are very fun to write. And then Grandma and Grandpa, who were terrific too. And I got to say, each of the cast members, I think, brought to it their own personality, their own talents, their own skills, and really made these characters their own along the way. So that was just delightful to see.
Yeah, there's that. I think one of my favorite scenes is the scene between Grandpa and Mary Ellen, where he tells her that, no matter what your name is, you're always a Walton. Which is what I found so fascinating about this film, is that it takes these characters that we know, and the spirit of them is still there, just slightly different. Was that something that, do you think that has also to do with some of the casting as well?
I do, but and I'm glad you liked that particular scene, because the graveyard scene to me was pivotal in a number of respects. It really underscored the family connection in a way that I thought was meaningful. And in the first homecoming, Mary Ellen doesn't accompany them on the Christmas tree hunt. And she's got some issues with John Boy. They all have kind of conflicts. I was looking for conflict within the family as well. You know, Jason and John Boy had their issues. Mary Ellen and John Boy has his, but it was a moment of reconciliation. And I think really underscoring how important family was. And at the very end, that return to the graveyard, I hadn't initially planned. And I was thinking there was a summary of, okay, in the original, we all get back together at the end and you know, have a glass of the recipe and reminisce. And I was thinking, as I thought about it, in contemporary times, the only surviving member would be Elizabeth. And it just seemed natural to go back to that graveyard and learn that John Boy had passed, but that he had achieved his dream. And it was also it's kind of a salute to Earl Hammond Jr., who'd passed, I think, 6 or 7 years before this was produced, and kind of a salute to him in a way. And I'll admit, when I wrote it, I got a little moist-eyed. I thought, this is really touching to me, and I hope it was to the audience. But it all goes back to that midpoint scene with Grandpa explaining the importance of family, and what the graveyard tells about their history.
You know, you talk about Richard Thomas taking over the narration, which, you know, seems so obvious, but yet was that always kind of the intention?
I think that was Sam's notion. And this goes back to Sam and his vision for this whole project. I think he wisely wanted to include and have that touchstone to the previous version of the Homecoming of the Waltons. And I'm delighted Richard did this. He's been very supportive throughout, and as well as earlier cast members as well. So that's reassuring.
I think one of the biggest changes was, you know, the number of children, really. You know, what was the decision behind that?
Well, I've got to claim I'm guilty of that, because we were spending so much time on John's story that I kind of blended the Ben and Jim Bob characters into one. You know, the reality was screen time, and how can you build those characters? And I think, you know, people missed having Ben there, but his presence is sort of in Jim Bob. So it was a practical solution, and I know it had some feedback that we miss him, but he's there. He just has a little different name.
Well, but I think therein lies one of the difficulties that I think a lot of people doing, you know, kind of revivals and remakes have, is how do you honor the past and still create something new for the time?
Well, it's a tricky business. There's no doubt about it. But I think at its heart, and it goes back to character, it goes back to theme, it goes back to values, that none of us lost sight of that. And Sam in particular is a great touchstone, because he knows the audience. He knows this back and forth. He doesn't just read scripts, he absorbs them. And for me, that made for a very happy collaboration. And I know if I could make him feel something with the script, that it would work beyond him. So I felt really good about the process, and he is the guardian, really, of Walton's name as it is now. And I'm just happy to be a part of the team as we move this forward, because the whole cast and crew is everybody. It was very collaborative, very collaborative.
Well, and you know, the newest film is currently in production, which makes me happier than I can tell you. And so I'm wondering, I know you can't say a whole lot about it, but what can audiences expect from this new one?
Well, let's say without spoilers, there are seeds in the first one that come to fruition. in the second one. And there's more freedom because we are not bound by a preconceived story or anything like that. And so we get another look at the characters in different circumstances. And I think, again, it affects the family in a way that there is conflict, there's difficulties, but at the baseline, they love one another and stand up for one another. And I found it entertaining to be a part of, to be seeing it unfold during the shoot, but to also see how all of the other elements of production, which is really problem solving, contributed to that same feeling. In effect, and this from the background people on down, they like to work on these programs because of what they say, and it becomes a family. The production crew, the actors, and the producers, we become a family over the course of the production. So hopefully that imbues the next production with the same sort of feeling.
Yeah, I feel like, even thinking back to the original series, there was, it's a period show, but it was also remarkably, I think, contemporary for its time in terms of its messages of acceptance. This was a devoutly religious family that was also incredibly accepting and of people that were different. Why do you think that this is the right time for this revival?
Well, I think that these are universal values, really, and they're not in a time lock. But I think now, given the difficulties we face and the complexity and so forth, that people are really yearning for the simplicity and the clarity that comes from just those interpersonal reactions. And that doesn't mean the Waltons always deal with them in the correct way, but they always come from a place of love, I think. And we've been very fortunate in the people that we've been able to attract to put it on film, to act in it, to be crew members in it. And I think that feeling imbues the whole thing, and we could all use a little more love these days, I think.
Perfect sentiment. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout the season. Jim Strain from the Waltons Homecoming, real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Tony, too. I enjoyed it.